the forging of the sword. The name clung to him like a cloak woven of chainmail and legend, Saifullah, the sword of God. Yet often, when the silence of the night settled over the camp, the man who bore the title felt the weight of the steel more than the divine grace it implied. He sat now, not in a velvet pavilion, but on a simple low stool outside his tent, watching the last embers of the watchfires glow red against the pre-dawn charcoal of the desert. The war was done. The internal wars, the wars of apostasy, the Ridda. They had been a furnace, and he, KHALID ibn al-Walid, had been the unrelenting fire. His work had ended the chaos that threatened to devour the nascent faith in its infancy. He had crushed the false prophets, unified the tribes, and secured the integrity of the caliphate. The cost, however, was etched not just into the desert sand, but into the deep, unforgiving lines around his eyes. He was 46 years old, built like a bronze statue, his movements possessing a liquid grace that belied his massive shoulders. His hair, dark and perpetually windswept, was now lightly dusted with gray at the temples. He was the greatest warrior the peninsula had ever known. But was he a saint? That was the question that followed him like a second, heavier shadow. A cloud of controversy always seemed to trail the divine sword. KHALID picked up a small polished stone from the ground and turned it over in his hand. He remembered a time not so long ago when his prodigious skill had been aimed squarely against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his followers. The memory was sharp, a painful shard of his former self, the debt of Uhud. There was no victory on the battlefields of the Ridda that could entirely erase the memory of Uhud. He had been a commander of the Quraysh cavalry then, a man driven by tribal pride and contempt for the new religion that threatened Mecca's economic and spiritual dominance. The Muslim army had held the high ground, the outcome seemingly decided in their favor. Then, driven by greed for spoils, the Muslim archers abandoned their critical post on the hill. KHALID saw the gap. He didn't think, he knew. It was a flash of pure intuitive genius, the kind that makes a general immortal. He didn't need orders, he needed a horse and an open flank. He recalled the thunder of hooves, the dust cloud erupting beneath his charge, and the terrifying, decisive moment when he wheeled his cavalry around the mountain. The resulting attack turned Muslim victory into sudden, bloody rout. He had killed men that day who would later become his brothers in arms. He had almost extinguished the flame of Islam before it could truly catch fire. That day, he hadn't fought for an ideal. He had fought for a tradition, a lineage, and his own raw ambition. It was this brutal efficiency, this terrifying ability to read the battlefield like a book, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his infinite wisdom sought to harness. KHALID's conversion came late, but it was absolute. When he finally rode into Medina, leaving his old life behind, the Prophet recognized his genius immediately. "Welcome, O KHALID. I knew you had a mind that could not accept anything less than the truth." The name Saifullah was given after the Battle of Makkah, a crushing pre-Syrian encounter where the 3 senior Muslim commanders were slain. In a moment of panic and near total collapse, KHALID had taken command, fought for 3 days straight, and orchestrated a masterful tactical retreat that saved the army from annihilation. It was a miracle of generalship. But the title, bestowed by the Prophet himself, demanded not just military genius, but spiritual discipline. And that was the hard part. The crucible of Yamama. The Ridda Wars were KHALID's crucible. After the Prophet's passing, a wave of tribal uprisings and false prophets, most notably Musaylama the liar, threatened to tear the caliphate apart. The Battle of Yamama was the lowest point of the early caliphate. Musaylama the liar had gathered an army of 40,000 men, far outnumbering the Muslim forces. When Khalid arrived on the scene, he found the Muslim lines battered, reeling, and close to breaking. He recalled the terrible silence that fell over his camp on the night before the final assault. The air was thick with desperation. He walked the lines, speaking not of tactics, but of purpose. He challenged a captive from Musaylama's ranks. "You fight for a temporary king. We fight for the king of all kings. You fight for the world. We fight for the hereafter." The next day was a horrifying slaughter. The sheer resilience of Musaylama's followers forced the Muslims into a ferocious, desperate attack. At one point, seeing his center falter, Khalid ordered his men to separate themselves by lineage, calling out, "Let us know where the tribulation comes from. Advance, O sons of every lineage." This audacious move reinstilled tribal pride, but channeled it through the unifying force of Islam, bolstering morale when it was lowest. The battle raged until Khalid cornered Musaylama and his core followers in a walled garden, forever after known as the Garden of Death. The Muslim victory was complete, but the cost was staggering. Thousands of Muslims fell, including a huge number of the Qurra, the early companions who had memorized the entire Quran. The victory at Yamama saved Islam, but it solidified Khalid's reputation as a general of terrifying, necessary ruthlessness. He had to be cruel to be kind, a difficult moral equation that perpetually plagued the pious men around him. The shadow of Malek. This moral ambiguity exploded shortly after the Battle of Yamama in the desert north of Medina, involving a minor tribal chief named Malik ibn Nawara. Malik was an important man, a respected poet, and a leader of his tribe, the Banu Tamim. After the Prophet's death, Malik had hesitated. Some claimed apostasy, others claimed he merely withheld the zakat, charity tax, and retreated to his people. Khalid was sent with a column to bring the Banu Tamim back into the fold. Malik was captured. The facts were murky. Did Malik commit apostasy? Did he simply refuse a tax? When brought before Khalid, Malik offered a defiant defense, hinting at his loyalty to the Prophet's mission, but his actions were, at best, confusing. Khalid, always a man of action, saw only ambiguity where clarity was required. The state of the caliphate was too fragile for indecision. He ordered Malik and several of his men to be kept under guard. That night, the desert air turned bitterly cold. Khalid ordered his men to warm their prisoners. In the Arabic of the time, this phrasing could mean to use fire to keep them warm or to execute them, a rough euphemism for heating the ground beneath their bodies. The guards, interpreting the order as an execution, or perhaps understanding the true, unspoken intent of their ruthless general, killed the prisoners, including Malik. The news ripped through Medina like a desert wind. The Caliph, Abu Bakr, received the report, but also a furious delegation led by Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar was Khalid's greatest critic, a man of uncompromising moral rectitude and stern, unyielding justice. He stormed into the Caliph's presence. "The sword of God has stained his blade with murder! The man was a Muslim! By God, Abu Bakr, you must remove Khalid from command and have him punished. He has killed a man who only delayed the zakat." Abu Bakr, the gentle, pragmatic successor, listened patiently. He knew Khalid's flaws, but he also knew the immediate existential threat to the caliphate. "O Umar," Abu Bakr said, his voice soft but absolute, "I cannot sheathe the sword that God has unsheathed against the enemies of the faith." Khalid made a mistake in judgment, a terrifying one, but his heart is dedicated to Islam. "I will demand the diya, blood money, for Malik, and I will issue a severe reprimand."
But I will not remove the greatest military mind of this nation while its survival is still in question. The time for justice against Khalid will come when the time for war is over." Khalid was called back. He stood before Abu Bakr, received the reprimand, and paid the blood money. He accepted the judgment without protest. He knew Umar was right, at least on the letter of the law, but he also knew, deep down, that in the brutal war for survival, he had done what was necessary, however ugly the price. The incident was his true forging. It proved that his authority was always subservient to the Caliph and the law of Islam. The sword of God was guided not by the hand of Khalid, but by the will of the Caliph, acting under the guidance of divine law. The man himself was flawed, but the mission was pure. The call to the West. The Ridda Wars had settled the internal boundaries of the young caliphate. Now it was time to look outward. Reports trickled in from the northern borders, reports of massive Byzantine military buildup. Emperor Heraclius, fresh from his own victories against the Persians, was marshalling his legions and local Christian Arab auxiliaries to crush the Muslim presence in the Levant once and for all. 4 separate Muslim armies, led by commanders less experienced than Khalid, were struggling to make headway. They were spread thin, outmatched, and facing annihilation. The fate of the entire expansion, the ability of Islam to move beyond the Arabian Peninsula and offer its message to the wider world, hung in the balance. Abu Bakr called for Khalid. The meeting was brief, held in a simple room in Medina, devoid of ornament. Abu Bakr, frail and stooped, stood only on the strength of his conviction. "Khalid," the Caliph began, his gaze piercing, "your name causes fear among our enemies and controversy among our friends. But the battlefield cares for neither. It only cares for truth. And the truth is, you are the only men who can save our brethren." Khalid stood at attention, his large frame filling the doorway. "I hear and obey, Commander of the Faithful. The armies in Syria are in peril. The Byzantines are preparing a host that dwarfs anything we have faced. You are to take half of your force, 4,000 men, and travel immediately to the Syrian front. You will assume command of all forces there." Khalid's mind was already racing, calculating routes, logistics, and supply lines. The direct route was heavily guarded. "I will go, Caliph, but the direct path is too obvious. We will be intercepted and destroyed. There is another way." "The way you took and the Ridda?" asked Abu Bakr gently. "The way that no man in his right mind would attempt," Khalid confirmed, a dangerous spark in his eyes. "Across the desert, the deepest, emptiest stretch between the peninsula and Damascus, 6 days and 6 nights of marching where there are no wells and no tracks. We will arrive in the Byzantine rear, unexpected and untouched." Abu Bakr nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the impossible audacity of the plan. "A great risk for a great reward. So be it. You have been appointed the commander of the faithful's general in the Levant. Use the sword of God to bring light, but remember the lesson of Malik." Khalid understood. The lesson was this: use your talent, your genius, your Saifullah, but remember that the ultimate purpose of this weapon is not conquest for its own sake, but the establishment of justice and peace under the banner of God. His sword was not his own, it was a tool of a higher moral ideal. His mission was not merely to win battles, but to offer salvation, or at least sanctuary, to the defeated. "I understand, Caliph," Khalid replied, a quiet intensity in his voice. "The sword will be used for protection, not predation. The covenant will be honored." The Desert Gambit. Within 48 hours, the chosen 4,000 were ready. They were the veterans of the Ridda Wars, hardened, loyal, and bearing a deep, almost mystical confidence in their commander. They knew that where Khalid led, victory followed, no matter the odds. The plan was madness: to cross the desolate, trackless desert of Samawa, a stretch so devoid of life and water that even the Bedouins avoided it, was a death sentence. Khalid gathered his camel trains. He ordered all the water skins to be filled, but the stroke of genius, the detail that only a mind like his could devise, was the camels themselves. He ordered 20 of his strongest camels to be given double rations of water, and their lips were tied shut. They were traveling water reservoirs. "When we reach the point of no return," he explained to his weary captains, "when the final skins are drained, we will slaughter the camels. Their stomachs will provide the last gallons we need to complete the journey." It was brutal. It was pragmatic. It was pure Khalid. They rode out just as the sun broke, a column of dust and determination moving away from the safety of the caliphate and plunging into the vast, indifferent emptiness. The journey was a trial of faith. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the shifting agony of thirst. The men recited the Quran, whispered prayers, and fixed their eyes on the distant, shimmering horizon. They were warriors, but in that desert, they were also pilgrims, utterly dependent on their commander's foresight and God's mercy. On the 5th day, they staggered to a halt. The water was gone. The men's lips were cracked, their eyes sunken. Doubt, thick and heavy, settled over the camp like a shroud. Khalid gave the signal. The reserve camels were slaughtered. The grisly, necessary task provided the scant, muddy moisture they needed for the final push. The journey ended on the 6th morning. They emerged from the desert dust near the Byzantine city of Swa, far in the rear of the main Byzantine defensive lines. They were alive. They were parched, exhausted, but completely undetected. The warriors of the caliphate had arrived not like an invading army crossing a border, but like a sudden, terrible manifestation from the empty earth itself. The mission of redemption had begun. Khalid had shed the skin of the pagan warlord and even the flawed military executor of the Ridda. Now, at the head of a small, battle-hardened force, he was ready to face the world's most powerful empire, guided by a singular, fierce dedication. The past was history. The higher moral ideal of Islamic justice was the future. The sword of God was unsheathed, aimed at the heart of the Levant. The world would soon learn the cost of crossing the man who knew no defeat.